We're rolling. Michael Heinrich from Zero G. Welcome.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. First off, congratulations on winning the Kaito Leaderboard Battle Royale. Zero Gravity will be listed on the Kaito Connect, I think, on Wednesday or next Friday or this Friday.
This upcoming Friday, yeah.
That's exciting. I definitely have some questions around that. But before we get into questions around marketing, positioning, branding, would love to first hear about your origin story. How do you get into crypto, and more importantly, like why do you stay?
Yeah, I've known about Bitcoin probably since 2011, but didn't really pay much attention to it at that time. And really, when I started going to graduate school, about 10 years ago, is when more than 10 years ago at this point, started to learn about kind of Bitcoin because I heard Mark Andreessen talk about it. I heard Tim Draper talk about Bitcoin. I was a DFJ fellow at that time. I was at Stanford, and so that was really my initial introduction into it. And basically came in like many people, just invested some Bitcoin on Coinbase, and then read the white paper and totally got hooked. And when I really got hooked was kind of during the ICO stage, because I just saw this like 2016, 2017, like this explosion of creativity. And I knew I wanted to be part of the industry from an operator standpoint eventually. At the time, I was running a very fast scaling kind of Web2 company in the health and wellness space, technology, health and wellness space, and even tried to see if there's applications of blockchain within that company. For example, there's a way of aligning different suppliers via blockchain and then kind of openly share where different aspects of the supply chain are moving. But it was way too early at that point. Everybody was like, what's a token? Like, I can't hold this on my balance sheet. I'm not going to share information with my competitors. And I was like, okay, too early. So let's revisit this a little bit later. And then kind of scaled this company quite a bit. But then late 2022, I got a call from my classmate, Thomas, and he basically said, hey, we've invested in crypto and a bunch of things together. I know you wanted to do something in this space. I invested in a company called Conflux. Ming and Fan, two of the co-founders, want to do something more global scale. You interested in meeting with them? And I basically said, yeah, why not? I'm open to something new. Met with them 6 months of co-founder dating later. I basically came to the conclusion that, wow, they're like the best engineers and computer scientists I've ever worked with. And I don't care what we start, we have to start something together. And so that was the origin of Zero G. That was in May 2023 at this point. Yeah.
When you first met your co-founders, did you have the idea at that time to start Zero G to the first AIL1? Was that the initial product that you guys sought to build, or was it something else?
Well, it really started with the team. And so then it went from how do we take this like amazing team of great computer scientists and kind of business backgrounds and then build something in the space. Just to give you a sense, like San has 2 Olympic gold medals in informatics. He's an MIT computer science PhD, wrote many top academic conference papers together with Ming. He's a professor at the University of Toronto as well. And Ming, he was actually Ming's intern initially at Microsoft Research. That's how they met. And then Ming's been at Microsoft Research for 11 years and wrote some of the key papers in distributed storage, scalability. He wrote some of the first AI algorithms for Microsoft Bing as well. So like really, really strong kind of backgrounds. And so we took that expertise and said, we want to find something that's at the intersection of what are we passionate about? Where do we have domain expertise, and what's a major unlock for the space? And it took us probably a good like 6 months to really figure that out, just because we started speaking with builders in the space. And initially we were thinking, well, maybe there's something on the interoperability side that needs to be solved because, the user experience still was kind of lacking at the time in Web3. But then eventually settled that AI is really where our passion lies and where we actually see the biggest impact that blockchains can make as well. And so that was kind of late 2023.
And since then, I mean, the mind share of AI plus crypto has just taken off. I mean, it's the majority of conversations in crypto have been around AI. And so zero G has really kind of you guys are in a perfect sweet spot right now, and really I feel like it's there's a lot of momentum. Tell us about zero G and kind of like the key aspects of like what makes it different from other L1s. Um, this idea of like the first AI layer one is a new category, and zero G is clearly like the first in that category, and the first in any category is you can make a bet that that's going to win. Tell us about that, and like what differentiates. First of all, tell us about the category AIL1, and then zero G. What's different from zero G versus your other layer ones.
Yeah, we wanted to purposefully build a layer one that's specifically designed for on-chain AI applications. And so we basically designed every parts of the stack so that it's available for AI type of workloads. And so we basically have a few components. One is the chain component. So that's the layer one that has the consensus and so on. The data availability piece is kind of built on top of that. Then we've got a storage layer, and then we've got a compute layer for things like inference and fine tuning and eventually training as well. And so all of those components are basically there so that you have a one-stop shop experience. So if you're a builder, let's say you're coming from Web 2 into Web 3, and you're like, okay, well, how do I even start? I want to build an agent, let's say. I have to figure out, well, what agent framework do I use? What do I use as my backend? What like inference methodology do I use? Do I use ZKML? Do I use TEML? I need to fine tune my agent. Like, where do I go for that? Where do I even put a vector database? How do I then make this all testable on chain? And so before you know it, you have like 10 different services you need to chat with. And we just try to make it super simple so that it's a one-stop shop experience by putting all of the best of Web3 AI at your fingertips. And so we can't do this alone. We work with more than 300 projects building on top of our chain, as well as integrating with our infrastructure layer to make that a very seamless experience for builders. And so that's kind of where you see a lot of that design thinking come into play.
The idea of like vertically integrating all the services that developers need. What was the thinking behind that and some of the conversations you had? I'm sure you did a lot of customer development as you spoke with potential developers and customers and the types of services and apps that they needed. Like, tell us about those conversations that led to kind of the product decisions you eventually came to.
Yeah, I mean, we want to target both kind of Web 2 developers and AI coming into Web 3 as well as Web 3 builders. And so there's generally two separate ways of thinking about the world. For the Web 2 builders, it's very much like, hey, why should I switch if I have really simple, API calls and I have everything under the hood with OpenAI? It's like very simple. So for them, it was about simplicity initially. And then the other factors that play into it is really, how do I build my application in a very customizable way? And from there, open source is generally superior because then you can really dial in like which model do I use? How do I fine tune the models? What type of context windows do I need? And then recently with, for example, DeepSeek's emergence, also the cost pieces, I forgot exactly, it's like 500x more cost effective than OpenAI O1, for example, with the same performance. And so now certain applications actually also become possible as a result of that. And so that's kind of the Web 2 builder perspective coming into Web 3. For the Web 3 builder perspective, it's very much about like, how do I create something that's performant enough so that I can actually get up and running very quickly. So if I'm trying to build an agent, for example, that's let's say, or multi-agent system that's chatting on X with each other, how do I reduce the friction and make that kind of performant enough so that I don't have any kind of like performance bottlenecks? So a little bit of a different perspective from a Web3 builder.
I looked at the ecosystem. You have 300 like vertically integrated applications and services. It's really incredible what you guys have built over the last really 2 years or so. Tell us about the work involved in doing the outreach to all of these projects, getting their buy-in to integrate and become part of the zero G ecosystem. That's incredible work that you guys have done. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It was both inbound and outbound. So the inbound happened because we positioned ourselves very clearly, like, hey, we're purpose built for AI. And so as a result, we had, data labeling companies, come in inbound. We've had agent type companies come in inbound. And then the outbound piece is very much like being present at events, being present on social media, being present on, podcasts like this. Very much helps with kind of getting a little bit of that mind share. And then when we kind of reach out to a specific project that we're really interested in, they're like, "Oh yeah, I've heard of you guys. Like I've heard of you here or there," and that's been super helpful. But we have a BD team of about 3 people as well, so they've been pretty active on both sourcing as well as handling kind of inbound requests. But lately, the inbound has definitely been much more than the outbound.
Well, your team of three, they're definitely punching above their weight with being able to close 300 plus partners. That's really incredible. Um,
Yeah, really
and
proud of
and
the team.
really big names too. Now, if I were a developer and I was building an app, it's the product, the the value prop that zero G gives me is that you guys built zero G from the ground up, based on first principles. Like if you were to create a layer one with all the services that AI applications need, like what would they have? What would it look like? How performant does it need to be? It's really valuable that what you guys have done. Like you started from scratch. Like if
Yeah,
you were to build this
basically.
thing from zero, like what would it look like? Um, and that I imagine is a huge value proposition for developers. When a developer is looking at building on zero G versus another layer one or another chain, like what do those conversations look like, and how do you kind of convince them to build on zero G versus another chain?
It really depends on where they are, let's say, in the AI stack. So the conversation can be quite different because sometimes what they really need is like really fast storage, for example, because they're building a data labeling service and they need a place to um, kind of store things in a very decentralized and verifiable way. Other times it's about, hey, I just need a very simple way for our users to be able to use your inference service. And so it depends a little bit on the kind of situation. Every situation is a little bit different. But being aligned with an AI specific chain, that alone is very helpful because then you're part of this broader ecosystem um, that leads to others to want to be part of it as well. So it's kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy, if you will. I think that alone has been a very strong draw. And then the second draw is the kind of technological superiority in many instances. And then the final is just around how we think about the cost perspective as well. So if you're switching from, let's say, an Amazon S3, we can be up to 80% less than that at the same performance levels. So for example, on the storage side, we've tested our storage at about 2 GB per second in throughput. And that's the fastest ever recorded in kind of decentralized storage. And so very proud of a lot of those types of results.
That's great. There's looks like from a product perspective, there's kind of four key offerings or four key um, main parts of the zero G ecosystem. So there's the chain, there's compute, and then storage, and then data availability. Could you take us through each of those and maybe share kind of like what's unique about it, and keeping in mind like the AI developer specifically?
Yeah, I'd say there's also a service marketplace component, and I'll
Mhm.
get into that in a second because we consider data availability kind of a bit more part of the chain part, and I'll explain why in a second. Um, so on the chain part, right now we're using essentially kind of a version one of the chain just to kind of get things going so that we can actually utilize the benefits of consensus layer and so on. Our goal, however, is to build a second version of this chain later this year, where we've essentially figured out a way where we can get to infinite TPS, if you will, so that the chain itself scales depending on the workload. So one of the issues you have today is, so for example, on Solana, like pump.fun makes up something like 70% of the transactions. And, you know, you speak to pump.fun and they're like, well, we want to move off the chain because we have too many failed transactions. We want to like build our own infrastructure. And so we can't let that happen for like specific AI workloads. So for example, if you're running training on chain, you start having a lot of failed transactions, then you're never going to finish, training that particular model or fine tuning that particular model. And so that's the big issue. So how do we make sure that the chain consistently scales itself? And so the way we figured that out is we built this data availability layer where every node that gets added to the network adds to the overall throughput. And so you can get to about, let's say, 5,000 nodes with a custom consensus layer. And so it scales to about that. And so every node, depending on what you use, can get to about 30 megabytes per second in throughput. And so you've got, the gigabytes per second of throughput now, which, by the way, no other DA layer is capable of doing. And then what happens is that the consensus layer itself becomes the bottleneck. And so we've basically then figured out, well, what happens if we also horizontally scale the consensus layers themselves? And so that then leads to infinite scalability because you can just spin up an arbitrary number of consensus layers. So as the nodes increase, the DA nodes increase, you can increase the consensus layers as well that you match with them. Now, what you can then do is you can also modularize the execution layer. So then you can combine the execution layers with different DA layers. And so then you can essentially drive the transaction throughput, for however much you want. And so transactions per second no longer is an element or a blocker to actually building fully on-chain applications. So there's a lot of like engineering that goes behind the scenes to make that happen. The other thing we're trying to figure out is how do we go below 100 milliseconds in latency on a layer one? Because usually if you have a 3-shot consensus, if you have speed of light, let's say, you have validators in all parts of the world, the fastest you could ever get to would be 100 milliseconds. That's assuming, speed of light. Now, how do we get to 50 milliseconds? How do we get to 30 milliseconds without giving up some of the decentralization aspects? And so we're doing some kind of research into it with kind of, let's say, local consensus and then kind of getting to global consensus in different pieces, which would be the first time something like that gets figured out on the layer one. So those are some of the kind of hardcore engineering problems that we're trying to solve for this next version of the chain. Once that's done, you can basically run any application fully on-chain, whether it's AI, whether it's on-chain gaming, and so on. Everything's possible. The storage piece we touched a little bit upon, but the idea is to have a competitor to something like an S3 or kind of a Google Cloud, but just fully decentralized. So there's no censorship resistance. You have something that's fully, how should I call it, a disaster recovery there's disaster recovery built in because you generally have multiple replications across the network. And at a cost, again, that's 80% less than kind of centralized solutions. Then the compute layer is verifiable inference, verifiable fine-tuning, and eventually fully on-chain training. The training piece is something we're still doing research in that's not available. Fine-tuning should be available end of the month, which we're really excited about. So that's there. And then finally, there's the service marketplace layer, because if you think about using your iOS or your Mac OS or Android or any of those types of operating systems, you usually have something like an app store built in. And the App Store, what does it handle? It handles registration of different providers, and it handles payment of different providers. So we basically enabled that service layer as well, so that anybody, whether they're like an Akash or an Aether or a Fala and so on, can register themselves, register the network, and then other people can utilize that from the service marketplace. So those are the whole components, and that's what we call the decentralized AI operating system. So you've got all that power basically at your fingertips building in this space.
That's exciting. Question around the data availability piece. Is that something you guys built from the ground up, or is that through that service through a partner?
No, we built that from the ground up because that's the key component to actually get to this massive amounts of scale to put AI
Mm,
fully on chain.
got it. Now, if a another data availability project wanted to partner with Zero G, um, so that developers that build on Zero G would have an option to either build on Zero G DA or another partner. Is that something possible? It would give developers an option, but may not have the benefits of from the ground up DA that is native to Zero G.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly possible because in this kind of architectural design, because it's modular in nature, you could have different consensus mechanisms. Like we could use another L1, for example, to be a consensus mechanism as well. We could use another DA layer to actually be this DA layer too. Now, the downside of that is that most DA layers usually don't go beyond 10 megabytes per second in throughput. And so even a single node on our network does, more than 30 megabytes per second in throughput. Actually, I think Celestia may be the fastest. They're probably doing like 27 megabytes per second for their entire network. And so why utilize something that won't meet the needs of kind of fully on-chain AI applications? So if you think about training, for example, NVIDIA InfiniBand, I think, is in the hundreds of gigabytes, if not
Mhm.
now in the terabytes as well in throughput. So if you want to replicate that level of performance, then yeah, even stringing together all of the other DA layers together and utilizing them won't get you that level of performance. But yeah, that's kind of the long answer.
No, that makes sense. What if I have already another hypothetical? If I already have an application that needs a data availability service, but it's built on another chain, is the data availability service on Zero G, is that uh, could I call? I guess would I be able to use that though I've built my application on another chain? Like, do I have to build it on Zero G?
That particular chain would have to use our DA layer, essentially.
Okay.
So there's a few options, essentially. You'd have to either use our DA layer, or you move on to an app chain and then use that DA layer. Another way is to basically have the chain run in alt DA mode, depending on what kind of chain it is. So you could have a primary and then a fallback DA. So
Hmm.
there's different kind of options of how to structure it. But yeah, the chain itself would have to run the DA layer.
So it sounds like the key offerings that Zero G has, at least the DA piece, could also be kind of chain agnostic. It could be used by other chains. Um, that's pretty exciting from a business development perspective and from growth. Is there a strategy to get the key services that Zero G has um, uh, onto other chains?
Yeah, I mean, it comes from this design philosophy that we don't want to dictate how you build. And
Mm,
so we wanted it to be modular enough so that if you just needed to use storage or if you just needed to use DA, you can definitely do that. And so it's like an introduction to the ecosystem, if you will. And that provides flexibility in terms of how you build and what you build. And even from kind of our L1 perspective, if you natively deploy a DApp, we would want for you to have the choice of what language you build it into. So we're fully EVM compatible, but if you wanted to use the Move language, we want to enable that in the future. Or if you wanted to use SVM, we would want to enable that in the future. And so even at the execution layer perspective, to be modular enough so that the developer can make choices. Because in Web 2, I mean, many people write in Python. And, another amount of people write in TypeScript, and then others write in, Rust, and so on. So there's all these different preferences in terms of how people build, and so we just want to make it really seamless and easy to get up and running in whatever shape and fashion you want. And maybe you have very specific requirements. You need really fast DA, so you use our DA as well. But then you want to use kind of a different like chain architecture because customization of the token mechanics is really important. So you have your app chain. So it really depends on the end user use case.
I think that developer first approach is really admirable, and I appreciate you saying that and designing Zero G in that way. As zero G approaches mainnet, and would love to hear more about what that looks like and maybe any timing. Um, Curious about your growth strategies. You know, when layer ones move to mainnet, having those first few set of applications that kind of act as a magnet for users is really key. What would love your thoughts on kind of what that looks like for zero G.
Yeah, it's kind of coming. A good analogy is like you go to an amusement parks and amusement park and there's no rides. You just bought a ticket, but there's no rides. And so very similarly, if you come to a chain and there's not some really interesting good applications, then it has the same type of issues. And so generally, an L1 needs to have some kind of basic applications like bridging, like a DEX, lending type of protocols, type of launchpad as well. There's kind of the basics that need to be fulfilled. And so we do that through a combination of acceleration, where we kind of handpick teams to work with, as well as builders that are just really excited and want to deploy on our chain because of, let's say, the kind of AI components that we offer. And so we believe more in quality versus quantity, even though sometimes meeting long tail needs is also very important. So the quantity aspect needs to be there. But from a kind of focus perspective, we're very much like, how do we really attract the best builders to the chain? And how do we create really interesting experiences? So for example, on the DEX side, our team, the team that's essentially working on the DEX, is looking at, well, how can we include ZK dark pools, for example, or how can we include Def AI agents as part of the trading experience to really utilize the capabilities that Zero G offers, so that it's not just like, hey, you're coming to our L1 and it looks like every other L1. There needs to be something unique as well, so that you can actually utilize the capabilities that we've built.
So every app will have like an AI component, or can I build an app and not have an AI component?
I mean, it's really up to the builder, but I think the
Yeah,
builders that have chosen to come to our chain so far, they really want to utilize all of the capabilities.
and that makes sense. I was just trying to differentiate between kind of a general purpose L1 versus the very specific kind of AI purpose built piece. Um, that's really interesting. This project, or this team that's building the Dex has the what is it, Def AI component to it. Would love to hear more about that, and that's going to have its own kind of growth strategy in terms of bridging assets over and then participating on the Dex. Um, how does Zero G support these developer teams that are building apps, and how do you help them grow?
Yeah, we have a few kind of ecosystem programs that we're going to be releasing pretty soon. We're going to have a big ecosystem kind of fund initiative where essentially we will have both an investment component as well as a kind of grant component to it. We have a accelerator where the teams get a lot of my time as well as the team's time to craft very clear go-to-market strategies, very clear investor structuring approaches, all of that type of perspective. So a lot of attention and time is really spent by the team to make sure that whoever is building on our chain or with our infrastructure is ultimately very, very successful. So that's from the team side. And then there's the external components. We're building a very strong ecosystem of builders that can help each other, whether it's you've come through the accelerator, or you're just building on chain, or you're building with some component. You get to be part of this community and then basically exchange ideas and learnings together, and so really create a very strong builder community as well. So kind of internal, external components that we support with.
That makes sense. I remember I led growth at Harmony Protocol
Mm.
when one of the key apps that really helped to grow was DeFi Kingdoms, and
Mm.
we didn't expect it at the time. We knew we saw something that was really special, and then all of a sudden we started seeing TVL go up, and then all of a sudden TVL was over $1 billion, and
Oh,
bridge to
wow.
Harmony. Our RPCs were dying, and we didn't know what to do. And it was one of those things where we some of it was in our control, some of it was planned, but a lot of it was just like kind of luck. And so as you're looking for these applications to build on zero G, I guess what's the um, what's the worldview you use as you look at these applications, and which ones will become the magnet to really draw in, assets to be bridged to zero G, people, eyeballs, attention. It's a really hard problem. But I'm curious the approach that you're taking.
It's a very hard problem because you have to take multiple bets in a way, because it's just like if you're a VC and you say like, oh, with 100% certainty, I'm going to tell you all of these portfolio companies are going to return and they're going to be successful. Like nobody can guarantee that, right? Even the best, let's say on the Web2 side, I think it's still close to a coin flip, basically, from a probability outcome standpoint. So if I could tell you like with 100% certainty, here's the 10 companies that are going to do like amazingly well, don't trust me. Just statistically, it sounds very, very infeasible. But given kind of human nature and taking a first principles approach, we can say, well, there's certain things that people really want to enjoy doing. Like one is entertainment. And entertainment can come in different types of forms. It can come in a game form. It can come in more of a form like a launchpad, like Pump Fund, for example. It can come in a form of like, I want to feel a sense of like belonging. So based on kind of these core human needs, we can then map out and say like, okay, here's the likely type of application with an additional kind of overlay of AI that can do well. And so then based on kind of this map, we can then say, okay, there's probably these 50 different application areas that we should look at. Then we can rank, order, and prioritize them and say, okay, based on this, we're then going to focus on this. So the way we've approached it is to say, we need to get the basics right. So let's focus on kind of the DeFi components first, get all of the kind of key liquidity elements in, and then we can focus on the more entertainment pieces second. That's how we've approached it in general.
I think that strategic approach that boils down to the tactical pieces around like which app categories make the most sense, and then even the sub segments below that, I think is really wise, and it's really the only way to do it. Otherwise, you'll just be guessing. But it sounds like you guys have that have a clear approach there that makes a lot of sense, and I think that you'll find a lot of success there.
Yeah, we hope that a kind of more structured approach basically leads to a higher probability of success versus one that's like, okay, let me just try a bunch of things.
Yeah.
Type of approach. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Another approach that I've seen other layer ones take is they court current apps that are built already on other layer ones. And so the problem that I've seen is, especially with EVM chains, is that they just clone the exact same app, they port it over, but then they don't give it full support in terms of supporting developers that are using it, or users, or trying to build a community on the new chain.
Mhm.
And that could be a problem too. And I've seen that actually happen quite a bit, and I've committed that same problem. As I've done business development and work with other applications and other chains to get them over to my chain, or the chain that I'm supporting. But then the application, the development team behind the application doesn't also build the community on that chain. You could have some issues.
Yeah,
So
the thing that also we want to avoid as well, kind of that brings up this point of we don't just want to be like, who's the highest bidder, come to my chain. We want much more of a kind of mission type of alignment. Like I'm here because I'm excited about the future of AI. I'm here because I want to kind of stress test the limits of what decentralized AI is able to offer. I'm here because I want to make AI a public good. So there's this mission alignment. And then I also want to build really cool technology that makes a lot of people happy. So that's what we want to stress versus just this kind of idea of let's be like super mercenary and just give like tons of grants to everyone. So they just start building our chain. We
yeah,
want something that's like very long lasting, basically.
and I think there was a time when the mercenary vampire approach and just giving grants to everyone worked, and then it didn't work. And so I think that having built zero G from first principles that is very AI focused, that key differentiator I think will weed out exactly who ends up on zero G. They've already self-selected, and I think that's really wise. And being first in the category is really key. I think you'll see a lot of growth there, and I'm excited for you guys. Let me ask a kind of a fun question. Tell us about the zero G Panda mascot. How like what was the thinking behind that? Because when you think of AI, it's highly technical. It's a lot of work, right? And how did you end up with a mascot like a panda?
We wanted to kind of humanize the aspects of technology or just make it a little bit more fun from that perspective. So I think the way it came about is somebody in the community called Wind that one of my nicknames is like Kung Fu Panda, which lovingly my wife gives to me because I love doing Shaolin Kung Fu and I don't know. I guess I must look like a panda when I'm doing it. So I have a bit of a bigger frame, I guess, from that perspective. Somebody caught wind of it and they're like, why don't we draw like a space panda or something like that? And then it was kind of this naturally, organically created community initiative. And we're like, okay, this seems super cool. We should just adopt this as our mascot.
I love that. Okay, that brings up several questions. I do Wing Chun, and so I
Oh,
that's
very
really
cool.
cool. That's really cool that you do kung fu also. Um, tell us about the community, and I understand it's a really lively community. I'm into the Discord, and it's quite active. Um, yeah, like how did you go about kind of as a very developer focused platform and a community that some of whom are not developers, like how did you bring a community together of people that can still have stuff to do, feel part of, like they're part of something, yet are not developers? Like tell us about the community building aspect to it.
Yeah, there's many things we still have to build around it as well. But it really started when we came out of stealth last year, sort of around March timeframe. All of a sudden, we were just everywhere, kind of all at once. Like we launched at ETH Denver and just did a bunch of kind of social campaigns. And then people were just like, whoa, what is zero G? I need to check this out. And then just that curiosity led to a lot of people just coming into the Discord and trying to figure out like what is this about, who's doing what, like who's the team behind this. This seems super fun. Let me be a part of it. So it came from this just like drive of curiosity is what we noticed. And then we started building up very quickly like the moderators and ambassador program. We even hired somebody from the community that helped us build the Discord, Jan, for example. He was like one of the first to raise his hand and say like, hey, you're getting a lot of influx of people. We should have put some structure around this. Like maybe we should have a poker night. Maybe we should have like a quiz like piece to it. And so it really came organically from the community itself saying, we want to engage and we want to engage on different levels. And a lot of our team members are pretty active in the Discord, whether it's like a validator saying like, hey, this, why wasn't I selected? Or for this like active set in the testnet, or what else can I do? Or can we do some like marketing thing together? So it became this like kind of self-fulfilling prophecy again and natural flywheel, which we were really excited about. So yeah, this initial kind of boom and expansion led to just a lot of excitement.
And you could really tell, like the communities that grow and build organically they have so much more staying power than those that feel kind of contrived and fake. And you
Mhm.
can really tell the zero G community is like they're really interested, and they're driven by this mission of AI. Um, when you first came out last year, at last, I guess it would be last February, right? When you came out of stealth,
Yeah,
did you
like late
feel
February, exactly.
late February around ETH Denver? Did you feel that AI? Were you worried that AI might be too early? Because in the last 12 months, it's really taken hold. But probably last February, I'm guessing it probably felt early.
I mean, we already were starting to think about AI back in November before that, and that's kind of really what we settled on because, and to us it didn't matter because we took a very first principles approach. We said, what are we really worried about in the future? Like, can we trust AI that we can't verify? We have this like GPT 3.5 and GPT-4 as it was coming out, like very powerful systems. But what's under the hood? Like nobody can verify it. You don't know where the data came from. You don't know who labeled it. You don't know how the model was trained. I don't even know which version of the model I'm being served. And on top of that, are you utilizing my data to inform future models? Yeah, very likely. In most cases, yes. And so I don't even have control over that. And so how can we trust this type of system when we start running bigger societal level systems with AI? Let's say, like airports, for example, or could be as benign as like trash collection or like large swaths of androids building buildings for us. How can we trust that if we can't verify it? And so then we started getting really worried about the future and saying, hey, there's a potential Terminator situation that can actually happen here without the right oversight. And so that was the initial line of thinking. And then it didn't matter if we were early or not, because we knew we had to build this future.
I think that's pretty visionary. On the verifiability piece, I spoke with another project that is infrastructure for projects with data that needs trusted execution environments. And so I'm curious about the data verifiability and how you are. I guess what's the approach that Zero G is taking with that? Are you using T's on the underneath?
For now, it's the most practical approach. So if you want to basically have no overhead in your inference and be, comparative to an OpenAI performance, then TEs is still the way to go. ZKML is just too far off from a kind of practicality standpoint for large scale LLMs. So anything, even above, 10 billion has significant slowdowns in terms of parameters. Another approach would be OPML. It still suffers from quite a bit of lag. So really TML is the most practical. I'm hoping that in the future with better hardware, with better algorithms, that ZKML becomes the kind of overall solution, or even something like FHEML. But that we're just not there yet from just a kind of development standpoint. So TML is still the most practical right now. Comes with its own set of issues. Many academic papers talk about how it can potentially be exploited. But for now, it's kind of, I would say, the 98% solution that works the best.
Yeah, when I led growth at Oasis Labs, and which is known for trusted execution environments, and that was a common kind of question that we had around these TEs, these they're potentially exploitable. And so that was kind of a common question that we had answers for, but definitely a lot of academic papers kind of questioning that. But I think it's really the smart thing to do, and it sounds like Zero G has also looks at potentially other what are they called, privacy enhancing technologies that are, when they become available and when they are don't impact latency, then they become available on the network.
Yeah, and there's major strides that are being made. Like we talked with a FHE team in Bangkok, for example, and they figured out a way of like 1,000x improvement versus, let's say, the leader in the space, Zama. And so those types of things are like super exciting. Of course, it needs to be more than 1,000x in order to be practical. But it's already a huge step of the way there.
That's huge. Let's a couple of final questions. Tell us about the Kaito campaign, and how did that go for you? And what are your expectations that now that you'll have a Kaito leaderboard?
It was super fun. It was kind of this like epic Olympic battle, I would say, because the first day, basically, we couldn't even vote because the website kept breaking down. And so I was like, I can't even place my own votes onto my own kind of Kaito campaign. And so we started probably in like, I don't know, like the 18th position or something because of that particular perspective. But then once we understood all the mechanics, then we really got our community rallied around, hey, this is going to be important. Once we have our Kaito leaderboard, we can also then tell like who's really talking about Zero G, who's really excited. And so then it started with an upswell of the community. And then so within, I think, a few days, we started being like number 5 or number 4 or something. And then it was really like, how do we get the last bit? And what I basically looked at, and Mega ETH, I think at that time was already leading. I basically looked at their growth curve and I estimated that they'll end up at roughly around 20 million votes. And I was like, okay, how do we get beyond that? How do we get to like 21 or 22 million votes? And so I tried to basically write all of our investors, all of the communities that I'm part of, and then be like, hey, we need to lobby for all these votes. Let's make sure we get zero G kind of the number 1 spot. And basically 3 full days of just doing that and talking with a lot of different communities. And there was a bit of a joke as well that basically the cabal stepped in and helped us out. And so had a lot of like top influencers basically come on our side. And then I think probably 20 hours before it was over, we eclipsed Mega ETH for the number 1 spot. And then every like 10 minutes, I was checking to see if we're either decreasing our lead or if we're increasing our lead. And then so the last 20 hours were just like literally like that. And I couldn't go to sleep. I was just like, okay, how are we doing? Okay, looks like we're on a good track. We're increasing our lead. And then, oh no, somebody just put in 50,000 votes for Mega ETH. We're decreasing our lead. So that's kind of what it felt like. And I just, rallied the community around it as well. I just said like, believe in something, like go all in. And then there were so many posts on X with like different community members just saying like, I only have 300 votes, but I went all in for zero G. It had to be zero G, and just like hundreds of those posts. And it was super fun.
That's
Super,
awesome.
super fun. Yeah.
Well, I definitely I pointed all my yaps and smart followers to zero G.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
What are the goals now that that zero G will have its own leaderboard? And how will that help with growth and or brand awareness?
It's really helpful for visibility, because with that data, we don't have to be kind of in the dark. Because and I actually chatted with you about this from Kaito, the founder CEO. And basically, what many projects end up having to do is they have to basically figure out, okay, I need to figure out some KOL round. I'm going to get these 200, 300 KOLs or whatever on board. And how do I even know if they're effective? Like, are they even doing any work? Because some might just say like, oh, I just want to get in and invest, and then forget about doing anything because I'm busy with my other stuff. So this actually gives us visibility, not only for influencers, but then also for like, who are the community members that are actually really engaged? Like, who care about us? Who care about writing consistent stories? Who are consistent over time? And it's a much more fair way of then saying like, okay, well, if you really care about what we stand for and the mission, how do we then make sure you're adequately rewarded as a community member? And so the Kaito board really gives that amazing visibility from a lot of signals that they collect on X. Now, I wish they could also do this for other social media pieces like YouTube or Instagram or TikTok and so on in the future. But this is a great start, and we'll definitely give some product feedback as well to you and the Kaito team.
Awesome. And the leaderboard goes live on Friday.
That's correct.
That's exciting. Well, I look forward to that, and I hope that the Kaito leaderboard will help raise brand awareness for zero G, both for just fans, but also developers. I think developers are interesting because they really follow momentum, and they're always asking themselves like why I should build on your chain. And they look at the community size, and not only just like the features of the chain itself and its offerings, but also kind of the liveliness of the community. And I'm hoping Kaito will help with that. So that's exciting.
It should help quite a bit. Yeah, it was a great mechanism. Actually, our managing director of the ecosystem, she made a kind of joke on X as well, and she basically said that now that I'm done playing CMO for Kaito, I can actually resume my real job. But it's been an amazing kind of mechanism for Kaito as well, getting their brand awareness out, but then in turn helping others with their awareness too.
Amazing. Well, Michael, Heinrich, thank you so much. And we look forward to watching zero G and you guys grow.
Yeah, super excited. Thanks for being part of the journey.
Thank you.